With the Boston Celtics holding a 35-win and 13-loss record in the NBA currently, seated both number one in Eastern Conference and league standings overall, I'm happy to introduce our next guest. On behalf of myself and Brandeis University, Boston Globe Celtics beat reporter Gary Washburn, thank you for taking the time to join the program today.
Oh, good to be here.
Before we talk hoops, I want to talk about your career as a journalist. Can you share with our listeners about your path to becoming a journalist, including the highs and lows of your profession and the lessons you've learned overall?
That's a really loaded question. Um, I started. I attended undergrad at UC Berkeley. I grew up knowing that I wanted to be something in the media. Um, of course, everybody has dreams of being a professional athlete, but I did not really have those like dreams in terms because I was never really good enough in terms of my play in, let's say, basketball or whatever. So I knew I wanted to be a journalist from a young age. I used to watch when I used to watch NFL games way back in the 80s. Um, I watched a reporter named Bryant Gumbel, who was African American like myself, and it was like seeing myself, someone who looked like me on the air, and he would do I guess what you could say like you know the reporters do now, the Adam Schefters or those type of guys. They're live from the game, they're on the field, the Kimberly Martins of the folks that are there, Ed Werders, those type of things. He did that in the 80s, and I thought, wow, I'd love to do something like that. I'd love to be on the scene of the game. And I didn't really pursue much in high school. I wrote one semester for the school paper, my last semester, my senior year. Uh, and then at UC Berkeley, I didn't start writing for the school paper until my junior year. I figured that I had to do something um, that was geared toward my career as opposed to working, let's say, as on campus in the cafeteria just to earn money, or in the library or something. I figured I need to do something on my resume that's for something professionally beyond graduation. And so I got a job at the newspaper. I went to the school newspaper and also the school radio station. The radio station was very welcoming. Said, "Hey, we'd love to have you. You can be on the air. Get I was really excited about it, but they didn't pay. It was free. Because it was a student run station. Student newspaper though they paid. So I took the student newspaper job, and when I first covered my first event, uh, Cal women's field hockey, it was great. I loved it. I knew that I had a kind of a calling there, and that's when I decided I wanted to be a sports writer. Um, I went to a job fair. I was 20 years old, met a lady named Annette John Hall, who might have been 30, and she was a columnist at the San Jose Mercury News. And back then, I thought that I was going to have to do like news writing too. I thought I was going to have to be like cover city council meetings and homicides and things, mayoral debates and all that, which I didn't really have much interest in covering that. And when she told me that I could be a full-time sports writer, I could do this full time, I didn't have to do anything else besides sports, that's when I knew I wanted to make it a career. And I've bounced around several newspapers, the Los Angeles Daily News, where I did the Clippers and USC and high schools, Contra Costa Times, where I did the Oakland A's. There's a movie called Moneyball that was probably about 10, 12 years old now, about the rise of the A's, and I was there during that time, the late 90s, 2000s. I covered the Orioles for 4 years for MajorLeagueBaseball.com. Then I covered the Sonics, which is now the Oklahoma City Thunder. But I covered them the last 3 years in Seattle, where they moved to Oklahoma City. And then I've been at the Boston Globe since 2009. I'm a national basketball columnist, general assignment columnist at times, and I cover the Celtics also in the NBA for the Boston Globe. And I said it's been 13 years now. So it's a great job. I would, I feel like I don't really work, although I do really work. It's always
It's
good
not
to
work
do.
if you enjoy it.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think you always want to do something that you like and have a desire and fervor for. And it doesn't necessarily pay the greatest, or you're not going to make some cases that people making $1 million. So let me not say that, or the Stephen A. Smiths and some of the reporters that have reached an echelon of television, which has been great for our business. But I really enjoy what I do. It's been an amazing career in terms of what I've been to 2 Olympics, I've been in NBA Finals, been to World Series, covered all types of great events. So not too many lows. The lows have been, at times getting laid off, or my newspaper in Seattle closing. Sometimes, getting beat on the story because it's a very competitive field where you're asked to break stories and be the first to have it. But mostly highs. Just covering great events, being able to write good stuff, and covering, like right now, a Celtic franchise that is looking to win championships, and is well run and well organized, and born and raised in Los Angeles. I grew up a Lakers fan during the Magic Johnson Showtime era. People ask if I'm still a fan. Not really. I think once you get into journalism, the fandom kind of subsides. You're an adult now. So, I still love, I'm still a big Dodgers fan, and I grew up following the Rams before they moved to St. Louis, and now they're back in LA. But the Lakers, not as much. Obviously, I don't have the fan. I have a lot of friends and family who are Laker fans. But to see the other side of this their rivals, and live out here, and it's interesting to see the different perspective. So it's been a great ride.
Can you talk about, though, the transition between covering MLB teams versus NBA teams? Because I know obviously the style of writing generally is the same, but I assume that what you're talking about is different, and you can't generally plug in the same words to talk about the Orioles organization as the Seattle Sonics.
Well, baseball it's like a acquired taste. Not everybody likes baseball. Not everybody wants to watch a 3.5 hour baseball game. Not everybody likes the idiosyncrasies of baseball, the strategy. That's the biggest difference. Basketball is obviously a much faster paced game. The players are more approachable in terms of covering the players, because if you think about it, most of your NBA players are millionaires. The first round picks have $1 million contracts. The established players are already millionaires. Most of the players that you cover are millionaires. In baseball, that's not always the case. A lot of times it's 6 years before you get rewarded with a really handsome contract. And obviously players such as like a Juan Soto, or now Boston Rafael Devers, they get rewarded with contracts before they hit official free agency. But those guys have to play 2 to 3 to 4 years, even minimum, to get those, 100, 200, $300 million contracts. So a lot of guys you're covering are not millionaires. Some of them
more humble.
No, not at all. They are less savvy, media savvy. A lot of them are not college educated. So I'm not saying nothing against that, but they went straight from high school to, Beaverton, Oregon for their first minor league assignment. So they are kind of wide-eyed and bushy-tailed. I said they're not very much media savvy. We don't cover high school baseball. When these guys are phenoms in high school, we don't really cover that as much as we do high school basketball, where you can go watch LeBron's son play, and you can watch, 20 years ago, you watched LeBron play in high school before he entered the draft. You watched, Kobe Bryant's games, and there was all types of high school basketball has been covered for years. So these guys are used to dealing with media since, they're 12, 13, 14 years old. Baseball players not as much. So you're not dealing with players who are media savvy. Some of them don't trust the media as much. They don't make as much money. They're not like basketball players, in a sense, are like even they're millionaires, so they've already been rewarded with the fruits of their labor. Even the rookies, where it's hard to be really upset all the time when you're making $5 million a year, and that's a low salary in the NBA. So it's just different. So therefore, you have to cover the sport a little bit different. You have to get into the strategy of the game, get to know the guys. You got 25 guys as opposed to 12 in the NBA basketball team, 15. Some guys are very approachable. When you are very talkative and approachable, love to talk to the media. Other guys aren't. Then there's a language aspect of it. A lot of non-speaking, English-speaking players in Major League Baseball or Spanish-speaking players. So it helps if you're bilingual. It helps you if you do know Spanish. It helps if you do know other languages, because you're dealing with players who are from the Dominican Republic, Curacao, Puerto Rico, Venezuela, very all over Central, South America, Mexico. So English is not their first language in many cases. So, baseball's a challenging sport to cover. I enjoyed it. I enjoy basketball greatly. But baseball is a sport that has a lot of tradition, and there's ways of covering the game. And so it's a little different. I would never deter anyone from covering baseball. I think it's enjoyable. And I think once you get into it and you learn it, it can be very fun.
Well, focusing explicitly and specifically on basketball, the Celtics right now, they're playing their first of back-to-back games in the Sunshine State. Last night, they lost to the Orlando Magic, 113-98. Tonight, they're in Miami. Examining last night and the last few months, what is your evaluation with how the team have balanced playing time to ensure that this team, again, does not burn out too quickly or risk injuries as the season progresses?
Yeah, I think it's a fine line that you have to think about when you're the Celtics. I mean, last year they really got off to a slow start. They went 18-21, obviously before ending the season 33-10 and getting the number 2 seed. Now you can theorize that run kind of wore them out. Robert Williams got hurt. Jason Tatum wasn't the same in the finals. You can say fatigue took over or was a major factor there. So I think this edition of the Celtics decided that they wanted to get off to a better start. Their mission was to get off and punch first, and they did. They got off to an 18-4 start. 35-12 before last night, 35-13. So they have mission accomplished. They're the best record in the league. They lead the Philadelphia 76ers by 4 games. They're trying to put a little bit of distance between them and the Sixers and the Bucks and the Nets, and try to, put some distance. But also now we're flipping, now we got 34 games left in the season, and you want to start giving some guys probably a little bit of a breather. And the question is, how much breather do you give them? Do you sacrifice a playoff seed or two to give them that breather? How hard do you go in the second half? I think, interim coach Joe Mazzulla is still trying to figure that out, the organization, where you don't wear out Jason Tatum, where you don't wear out Jaylen Brown. Like, for example, Jaylen Brown he's not playing just to rest his adductor muscle that he hurt and missed a couple of games last week. And so I think that's an astute, smart decision. Got a lot of big games coming up. You got the All-Star break, but you don't want to wear these guys out. It's only late January. So I think they're going to have to walk that fine line. But you also want to keep that number 1 seed. You also want to keep, that high level of play carrying into the playoffs. But you don't want to get guys hurt. You don't want to get playing guys 35, 45, 40 minutes. And Jason Tatum played 48 minutes, 7 seconds in that Golden State game. And I thought it was a smart move to give him a game off that Toronto game. So I think Celtics will start to pick up, okay, we need to give guys a break here. We want everybody well rested, so Al Horford doesn't play back-to-backs. Robert Williams is going to get his share of rest. For whatever personal reasons, Malcolm Brogdon will now miss a second consecutive game. So these guys are getting breaks. And then that all-star game where you're only going to have 2 guys going with Jason and Jaylen. The rest of the roster will get a full week off. And I think that's a good thing. And then you just try to ramp it up for the second half and play your best basketball in April.
Do you think that Celtics fans could and should be worried that maybe this team is peaking too early and couldn't run out of steam come playoff time like last year? Or do you think that just based on where they are right now, this team obviously is in a very different spot than what it was a year ago, and that's likely not feasible or won't happen?
Well, you can't win for losing if it's solid. If you're, let's say, if you're not 35 and 13, but you're 30 and 18, then people are going to be complaining that you're falling behind in the East. And oh boy, you're going to get the fourth seed, and you're going to, play the Sixers, or you're going to play the Heat, or you're going to play the Nets in the first round. So I think that Celtic fans should be pleased with the start, with starting off 35 and 13, taking first place over. And I don't think they completely burned out, like, I just think Tatum did. And you got to also add in USA basketball with that he played a full Olympic Games. He was the number 2 guy on that team behind Kevin Durant. Then he went right, jumped right into the season. So I think Tatum's got to be concerned about, because he likes to play. But I also think injuries probably took a little bit of a toll. And I also think execution too. And they didn't have the depth. I think this year the fans should be excited about the depth, and I think they'll add some more players as we approach the trade deadline. I think the Celtics will add to their team. But Malcolm Brogdon is playing well. Derek White's been better than he was last year. Grant Williams is always contributing and pitching in. So they have more depth this year. Luke Cornett has actually played a pretty good role with this team. So I think the depth will help that out. If you add another body in there who can contribute and take some minutes away from some guys, I think that helps too. So I don't think fans should be concerned about, let's say, oh, they're peaking too early, because if they weren't peaking early, then people would have a problem with them, slumping, or, being the 3rd or 4th seed. So you can't win for losing in that sense. I think that they found their groove, and they found a pretty consistent way to win ball games.
One of the players you just mentioned, and he's basically become the Celtics 6th man of the year, or at least just because Derek White did it last year, and Grant Williams also shared that position. But Malcolm Brogdon, can you talk about what he's brought to this team?
Just stability, a mature guy, a good locker room voice, a guy who's been around. It's only, I think, his 7th or 8th year, but he just has kind of really an old soul about him, a maturity, and in this team, he's one of the older players. I mean, you got Jalen and Jason are both in their mid-20s. Al's 36 and Blake's, 34, but the rest of the guys are all in their mid-20s, Peyton, Sam Hauser, Grant Williams, all guys who are 26, 25, that type of thing. And Malcolm's 29, and I think he turns 30 this year. And he's been around. He has a kind of a savvy about him, and on the floor, gets to the rim, can score at the rim, plus 50% from the 3-point line this month, and has been marvelous from the 3-point line. So just gives them a guy who can be pretty much that reliable number 3 scorer. I think that's what they lacked last year. I think that in some cases, you don't want Marcus Smart having to do all the scoring as a number 3 guy. You don't want him to try to score. Marcus needs to be an assist guy, score when it's there, back a guy in, scoring the post, maybe hit an occasional 3. But if Marcus Smart's taking 15, 16 shots a game, you don't want that, right? Not because he can't hit those 15, 16 shots, but he's not a premium shooter. He does a little bit of everything. So you want him to put those skills to use and pass the ball, defense, those little things, and let Malcolm at times handle that, being that number 3 guy, because you're going to get 20, like the loss in Orlando with no Brogdon. You got 26 points from Jason, 26 from Jalen. The next highest scorer was 13 with Sam Hauser. No one else besides Jason and Jalen pretty much showed up against Magic. And obviously the other reasons they lost the game, but you need Malcolm as that number 3 scorer. So I think that's what he brought to the team, kind of a stabilizing presence, something they didn't have last year.
Well, Malcolm was brought to Boston this past summer, and we can expect to see a plethora of, and hopefully at least some, NBA transactions before February 9th. That is the NBA trade deadline. What moves do you anticipate the Celtics making, if any at all?
Well, they have an open roster spot, after letting go Noah Vonleh. I think they will try to get a big man or a wing, a guy who can come a 3-and-D guy, a guy who can, stretch the floor like a Royce O'Neal type of guy, a guy who can defend, and not him himself. He's not available, but a guy who can kind of do those skills, a guy who can, when he's left open, he can hit a shot. Remember, the Warriors had like a Otto Porter last year who, was very good in the NBA Finals, hit three, like, he gives that element of a three. He can hit the 3-point shot. You got to account for him on the floor. I think they could look for that or another big, because you don't want Robert Williams to wear himself out or anything to happen to him during the regular season. You want him to be ready for the playoffs, where he can play in every game, because games will be every other day, so there'll be no back-to-backs. Say with Al. So you could use another big. You could use another mean guy in the paint, lay some wood, some hard fouls, get a rebound or two. They need to be better at rebounding. I think against Orlando's so big and they struggle against big teams. I think they see that that's their weakness. They struggle with rebounding. Orlando got a bunch of second chance points. They hit the boards. They shut the Celtics down in that situation. So it would help to have a guy who can maybe pull down 5, 6, 7 boards. And that guy could come from a trade. He can come from free agency. There's guys out there. DeMarcus Cousins out there. Dwight Howard's out there. I just read Kenneth Faried, former Denver Nugget first-round pick, is looking like they're guys who you just unleash them and they can play ball. They know how to play ball, right?
And
are they gonna get you 30 points? No, but they're gonna help you out in occasions, because that's all you're looking for at this point. You're just looking for a guy who can help you win a couple of ball games and be a guy who can get some minutes in a key situation.
so all this that you're talking about here seems to me that this was supposed to be what Blake Griffin was supposed to do when he was signed. Is he basically not lived up to the standard?
I don't think it's lived up to the standard. I don't think they want to wear. I think Blake is kind of a guy who's been great in the locker room, but I don't know if you can run him out there for like consistent minutes like that, where he can play 20, 25 minutes a game. Now, I think physically, it's not that he's not in shape. He's amazing shape. I mean, Blake's built like a brick house. It's just his legs are not what they used to be. His ability to move, all those things. Unfortunately, and what we don't really take into account when we hear about, read about professional athletes, is all the surgeries and all these scopes and all that take away your ability to move as quickly. You can't run as fast. That's why players tend to retire at certain stages, because they lose a step or they lose 2 steps because the constant pounding and the surgeries. And if you're at an NBA game and you see how hard these guys hit the floor multiple times a game, every day, and every game, because when they get fouled and they have to learn how to fall. So I think with Blake Griffin, so many knee scopes and ankle and hip and all that he just can't contribute like a guy who could play 10, 15 minutes a game. He just doesn't have that physical ability. I think it was a useful signing because I think he's great in the locker room. The guys love him. And I think he's going to give his all, but I don't think you can say, okay, Blake, we want you to play, when Robert's out, we want you to play 18 minutes a game, 3-4 days a week. I think that you pick your spots with Blake Griffin. They start him, and we'll see what happens against the Heat. But Robert Williams is back. Horford's out. Will he get minutes? But I tend to think that you don't. I think they understand what the Brooklyn Nets realize, is that you can't really run Blake out there on a consistent basis and think that he's going to be productive.
Whether it be a blowout win in Phoenix in early December, or last week beating Golden State in overtime at TD Garden, or even their back-to-back losses to Denver and Oklahoma City on the road at the start of the month, which game do you think has been their best or even led to their best?
I mean, you can point out the goal. I think the win at Dallas, where they had gotten really embarrassed at Oklahoma City,
and they just shut everybody down, including Luka.
Yeah, and they came out and they punched first and they led and they beat them by 29 points. And Dallas is not a great team. I mean, you can point to the Christmas Day game against Milwaukee. The 2 wins at Brooklyn. They have done the win at Memphis early in the season, because Memphis, I think, is 20-3 at home, and the Celtics have given them one of those losses. So there have been a lot of good wins. I personally think coming back from the Oklahoma City game and handling Dallas their lunch on a national televised stage with Luka, I think averaging 50-something points over the last previous week, hitting them in the mouth first and just, playing good ball and it wasn't it wasn't a Tatum game where he scored 54 points. It was, everybody contributed. And I think that was probably, to me, bouncing back from that in the beginning of that 9-game winning streak.
Alrighty. Well, before the 2021-2022 seasons, in separate contexts, no one would have ever thought the Boston Celtics would be playing how they did and are under coaches Udoka and Mazzulla. Why have the Celtics found instant success with these coaches, yet Coach Stevens encountered numerous and severe obstacles during his 8-year coaching career?
Well, I don't know if that's a fair assessment.
Is it just because right now it's too early?
No, I think injuries played a big part in the last years of Stevens. I think that they put a lot in Gordon Hayward that never worked out. They put a lot in Kemba Walker that never worked out. They didn't expect Al Horford to leave for free agency like he did and kind of just say, "Hey, I'm running to Philly," and that caught him off guard. The Kyrie Irving experiment didn't work. So I don't know how much of those things are Stevens' fault. I do think he eventually lost the locker room in terms of his message became diluted, and the players were kind of doing their own things. And I think it was time for a change. I think he understood that in that last year, the 500 year when they, got swept by Brooklyn. They lost, I think, gentlemen's before the one, not swept. And Jaylen Brown missed that series. But I just think, quite honestly, it was a lot of just unfortunate situations for Stevens in his last 3 years. I said, they really thought that the Hayward thing was going to work out. It never did. Kyrie, that last year was just a disaster. Al Horford just up and decides to take the deal that he ended up beating his last year on now, the 4-year, $109 million deal with the Sixers, thinking that he could play the 4 next to Embiid. That failed, and he ended up running back to Boston, and obviously they're going to leave now. So there's all types of situations and things that happen to Stevens. I don't think it's a reflection on him as a coach. I do think, though, he needed to probably fill his staff. Like the year that they had, he had Evan Turner as an assistant. I thought that was a real reach. I don't think Evan Turner was ready to be an NBA assistant coach, and they knew Evan, and he was kind of young, and I think you needed to get, let's say, a forceful coach on that staff, an older former player, former coach, a guy that could pull Tatum and Brown aside and say, "Hey guys, I've been where you've been." I think having a coach who was a former player was important. Now, Mazzulla didn't play, but his voice, he's been around. I think they respect that. And I think Mazzulla has taken the role of being more like a older brother, or more of not even that, or maybe a peer to them, as opposed to like, "I'm your coach, you do what I say." Like, I think that he has gotten their input. He has related to them because he knows he's young, he's inexperienced. It also depends on the staff. Depending on a guy like Damon Stoudemire, former Rookie of the Year, very, very, very top-notch, good NBA player in his day, can say, "Hey guys, I've been there. I've been traded. I've been to the 7th game of the Western Conference Finals with Portland, where he was on the floor with the whole dunk with Kobe through the lob to Shaq, in that 4th quarter collapse, and where basically Portland was literally maybe a basket or two from going back to the finals, or going to the finals, and the Lakers took it from him. I mean, and that was kind of the end of that era in Portland. Stoudemire was on that team. So I think just having a quality staff and having guys who can tell you what to do and you can relate to has really helped. And I also think, I said, Stevens, I do think he at times padded his staff with some of the guys that he knew and was familiar with, but maybe didn't have the authority that they should have had, in terms of they didn't have the influence on the players the Micah Shrewsbury's and some of the guys who were great guys, good coaches, but Kyrie wasn't going to listen to any of those guys. Some of those guys that they had were like, you played where? Who are you? Like, and sometimes you need that type of authority with a young team and with certain veterans. I think what Udoka did, what Mazzulla is doing now, is getting their input, but also Udoka's able to put his foot down and have that authority and said, hey, I've been there, I'm an ex-player. Where Mazzulla, they trust him, he's forceful, he's enthusiastic, but he also gets their input and feedback. And I think it's more of a brotherly type of relationship there.
Well, switching from coaching to player development and personnel decisions, how has Brad Stevens found instant success as president of basketball operations? Specifically, you look at Danny Ainge, and yes, he found diamonds in the rough during his tenure, but he also definitely made some decisions that backfired tremendously. And the best thing that I can think of is when Stevens was able to empty out the last 4 players on the roster that Ainge couldn't do during his time here in Boston.
Well, I think the one thing that I knew that Stevens didn't like the roster in his last year. He just did not like that roster, right? And he was not going to tell us publicly. He never airs out his guys. He's very complimentary of his players, protective of his players. But he did not like the roster that was compiled during his final season in Boston. So if he was not going to get bumped up to Danny Ainge's job, I believe that he was going to ask for more power in how to put the roster together. Because I think he felt like he knew what the team needed. And obviously he was right? And I think Stevens has been able to make tough decisions. He was very protective and loyal to Kemba Walker, right? Very protective. And as we found out, Kemba was dealing with a career derailing injury that I don't think anyone knew that it was going to be career derailing. People just thought, oh, he's got a sore knee. He's never really been hurt in his career. It's just a knee. Give it a couple of months, it'll be fine. But when we returned, and we all went down for the bubble in Orlando, and Kemba was still, after 3 months off, Kemba was still having to maintenance the knee. I think we all knew, okay, this is more than just like a sore knee. This is more than just like arthritis or anything. This is a knee injury that's going to affect the rest of his career. And unfortunately, he hasn't been able to stick anywhere, with the Knicks and then with the Mavericks, and they released him or whatever. Now he's still out there in the market. Hopefully he can find another place. But I think Stevens took over the job, he traded Kemba a week later. So Brad is a guy who is a bottom line guy. He's the nicest guy, very polite, but he understands this guy's got to go. This guy, we need this guy, he traded for Derek White. He got rid of Romeo Langford. He got rid of Aaron Nesmith. He has less patience, I believe, with the draft picks that didn't fulfill potential than Danny did. Danny let, guys like James Young and Gershon Yabusele, and he let those guys kind of.
Is part of that ego?
With Danny, I don't know if that's ego. I think part of it, you just have faith in young guys. You think the light's going to turn on, and to be honest with you, Nesmith's playing pretty well in Indiana. These guys aren't trash players. I hate to use that term trash. I think that's an overused term in sports. These guys are professional athletes. They're not trash. If you become a professional athlete, you make the NBA, you're a good player. It's just sometimes the situation, confidence, etc. I think Brad didn't have the patience that Danny did. And yeah, there is a level of arrogance there probably in terms of we can turn this guy around or we can develop this guy into a good player. But there's obviously mistakes we could talk about. I said the Yabuselis and guys, as I said, the James Youngs and RJ Hunters and all these guys that, were good guys, but just not quite caliber NBA players. And then we could talk about taking Nesmith and not Desmond Bain and, whatever, that was in Danny's last draft, where I think Stevens just has listen, I don't have any worth for first round picks at this point. So I'm trading the ones in San Antonio. I'm trading one in Oklahoma City. That pick ended up being the young guy from Houston, Sanguine. Ended up is the first round pick they traded in the Kemba Walker deal. So they gave up something for him. So I think Stevens has a philosophy of like, I'm not gonna fill the roster with a bunch of guys who can't play. And I think that was a problem last year. And I think he learned from that last year where there was guys on the team that were like, why is he here? You know, he's a good locker room. That's good. He can wave the towel and he's gonna cheer his guys on, but you need guys who can play. So he cleared out obviously that Indiana trade, you know, some of those guys that were just at the end of the bench, and he got rid of them, and he moved Dennis Schroeder and he moved Enes Kanter. They were just getting tired of Kanter's antics and his act or whatever. So he cleared the locker room of any distractions and guys who couldn't play and replaced them with guys who could play or can give. Now you look at down at the roster, everybody can give you something. Even Luke Cornett, you know, Sam Hauser can give you something. That was important.
Well, I wanted to also touch upon a piece that you wrote on. On Sunday, you reported that according to an NBA source, the Boston Celtics will file an application to host the 2026 NBA All-Star Game, the city's first All-Star Game since 1964. What more can you share about the selection process and the likelihood of Boston hosting?
I think it's a slam dunk. Sorry for the basketball term, but if Boston wants to host it, the NBA would love to come to Boston for the All-Star Game. It's just, they would love this. The Celtics have not applied for it. The reason it hasn't been in Boston is not because the NBA has picked a bunch of other cities over Boston. The NBA got anything in Boston. The Boston Celtics management and the city have never come to terms on wanting an All-Star Game. Now it's more feasible. The Seaport's been built up. They've built a nice, courtyard hotel right across the street from the Garden. They've built the Garden to have restaurants and bars inside the Garden. The Garden structure.
Better for tourists.
Yes, totally. More hotel space. The city has changed dramatically over the last, since I've been here, since 2009, obviously, but it has definitely changed over the last 5 or 6 years, where there are a lot of more attractions. And Boston's always been a great restaurant city, a great city to visit. But I think that, the Celtics felt like it wasn't feasible and wasn't profitable. Now, it's a question whether this will be profitable, but I think it will be great for the franchise. You got 2 cornerstone players and Tatum and Brown who will still be in the franchise. I believe they would believe in 2026. You can show people the best of the city. The city gets involved. New mayor Michelle Wu wants to highlight the city to the world, because you're going to have people from all over the world coming to Boston.
You got the largest college population.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's a way to sell the city. And I think that the one thing also is that if people don't remember, the Celtics don't own TD Garden. And that's usually kind of a way to get the All-Star Game is your owner who applies for it owns the arena. The Celtics do not own the Garden. Delaware Bank owns the Garden. So you've also got to deal with the people that run the Bruins. The Celtics and the Bruins have not had the greatest relationship over many years. They're respectful of each other. They play in the same arena. I think they root for each other, but it's a relationship that's not always been great, right? So I think that has thawed with new ownership and the fact that both have had to come together on things like rebuilding and refurbishing the area around the Garden. And so it's better for all parties. You also have to find places to have the celebrity game, an arena, the convention center where you have the fan fest where kids can visit and shoot baskets and win prizes and all that. You got to have the public aspect, the convention aspect of it too. It's not only the game, it's the celebrity game. It's places where are you going to practice, because you're not going to practice All-Star practice, not going to be at TD Garden. It's going to be at, maybe where BU plays, or maybe Conte Forum or something. They're going to have to find places to have these alternate events, and everybody's got to be in, and you've got to rent out for a week or so because you got to set everything up. You got to rent out the Heinz Convention Center. So I'm sure they looked at the schedule, looked at the calendar and said 26 is the best year to do this. Let's go for it. And it's up to the NBA now. The NBA is not accepting applications yet for 26. When they do, the Celtics will apply, and I predict they'll get it. It will be no problem. The league would love to come to Boston.
Great insight. Thank you. Before we let you go, if the playoffs were to start tomorrow, which Eastern Conference and Western Conference team do you believe could stand in the way of the Boston Celtics raising the Larry O'Brien Trophy?
It all depends. I mean, Milwaukee will be a juggernaut. The Nets, when they get KD back, Philadelphia is playing great basketball right now. And also, the first round isn't going to be easy. If they get a team like the Bulls, who have given them trouble, there's some teams. I think the Bulls is a team they do not want to face. And not saying they would lose in a series, but the Bulls could take them 6 or 7. The Bulls could they got something for the Celtics. And it's just the way it's been. Matchups makes games. So if I'm the Celtics, I do not want to face the Bulls, and the Bulls are starting to play better. So let's see where the Bulls end up. I'd rather play, if I'm the Celtics, much rather play Atlanta or, even maybe the Knicks or whatever in the first round, a team that whoever falls to 8th and wins the play-in and all that stuff. It's all convoluted right now, or Indiana or whatever, because I think they can get Indiana. But I'd say the Bucks, the Nets, and the Sixers in the East. I always say watch out for Miami Heat. In the West, Denver's a team I think is really putting it together. But I need to see more from Denver in terms of I need them to do in the playoffs. I'm just not trying to hear how Denver is the best team in the West. I don't really think there's a best team in the West. I think they all can beat the heck out of each other. Memphis is on a 3-game losing streak now. Phoenix seems like they're in trouble. The Clippers are up and down and can't really stay healthy. So the West could be open. Now, will Golden State resurrect and make a comeback? You'd like to think so, but just when they bench all their starters the night after losing to the Celtics and beat the Cavaliers, they play all their starters and lose at home to the Nets without KD. So the Warriors are continuing to be kind of a bumpy road, up and down team. So I think the West, the good thing for the Celtics is I think this is the year they can do it. In the West, all those teams are going to beat the hell out of each other in the playoffs. All of them, they're all going to come out with scars. And the Celtics could too. If they come out of the East, they come out with lots of scars. They came out with scars of that Miami series. I think that series went 2 games too long. They should have beat Miami in 5. They blew some games, and they end up having to win in 7. I think that took a lot out of them for the NBA Finals. So if you're the Celtics, you want to take care of business and, hope that a lot of those other teams in the East beat the hell out of each other too, where they're not quite right. But I think the Celtics, from what I've seen, is the best team in the league. They got to prove it when it counts.
Mr. Washburn, thank you again for taking the time to join the program today and providing great analysis.
Thanks a lot.